Hello, this is Steve from Able Movers. How can I help you?
Hi Steve, this is Peter. I need some help moving some boxes tonight.
Sure, we can definitely help you out with that. Can you give me a bit more information about the job?
Yeah, I have a few boxes that I need to move on my new house. I'll be out tonight, so the door will be unlocked.
Okay, I can come over tonight and take care of it. Can you give me your address?
Sure. My address is 619 Main Street.
Great, I'll take care of everything. Is there anything else you need from us?
No, that's all. Thank you so much, Steve.
You're welcome, Peter. Have a good night.
You too. Thanks again.
Well, hello there, everybody. It's me, your boy. And today, we're going to be taking a look into the hidden story of the indie horror title, Peter's House. I'll be explaining the story as well as adding some fluff to the narrative to make it a little bit more engaging. I hope you enjoy. We begin our story as Steve, the sole employee of the Able Movers company. Fulfilling the request of their most recent customer, Peter, Steve begins moving boxes from the foyer into Peter's newly purchased house late into the night. The boxes are clearly labeled to which room they belong in, with a few exceptions. There are a few unlabeled boxes amidst the others. Steve, simply fulfilling his duties, checks the contents of one of the boxes as to discern which room to place it in. Except the contents of the box are no ordinary household items. The end of a marriage. I couldn't believe it when she threatened to leave me. After all I've done for her, she had the audacity to suggest that we separate because that silly little dog. It's not like I did anything bad. Sure, I killed it, but it was barking too loudly. It's starting to piss me off. It's not like I haven't killed small animals before. Pigeons, rats, what's the difference? But she couldn't handle it this time. She caught me in the act, holding the dog's ear in my hand like some sort of trophy. That's when she threatened to divorce me. 20th of January, 2023. The death of a marriage. I couldn't let her leave me. I had to make her understand that I was in control. Now, whenever I look at that ring, I'm reminded of how powerful I am. 21st of January, 2023. Visibly shaken, Steve places down the box in the nearest room possible. Surely it was some sort of prop. It had to be. There was no time to be rattled. Steve was there to do a job. And as determined as he was to finish it, yet another unlabeled box stood in the foyer. The Snoop, Part 1. I was sure I'd covered my tracks, but her sisters were getting suspicious. One of them came to speak to me in person, sensing that something was not right. She kept prying and asking too many questions, so I had to take action. I couldn't risk her snooping around, so I had to think fast. I tried to convince her that my wife was on an away trip and wouldn't be back anytime soon. But she wasn't buying it. 14th of February, 2023. The Snoop, Part 2. She started getting too close, asking too many questions. In a moment of frustration, I grabbed a heavy object and struck her over the head. Her glasses flew off her head. She crumpled to the floor, groaning in pain. She lay there, gasping for air, grasping at her throat. I could feel her struggling beneath me as I squeezed the life out of her. It was a small victory. 14th of February, 2023. Footsteps could be heard directly outside the room Steve was in. He barricaded himself in the bathroom for just a moment before realizing this is just a joke. It had to be. Peter had to be the type of person to pull practical jokes on strangers. As unfunny as Steve found this joke to be, sick even, Steve had a job to finish. He decided he would finish his job and head home immediately. All this lifting must have made him exhausted, he thought. Only a few more boxes, then he would be free. The Betrayal of a Friend, Part 1. I never should have told my best friend about my wife. It was a moment of carelessness, a slip of the tongue. But what did it matter? He was just another person in my life who didn't understand me, who couldn't comprehend the power that I held. When he asked where she was, I casually replied that she was buried. He laughed it off, not realizing I was dead serious, but I knew I couldn't take any chances. 18th of February, 2023. The Betrayal of a Friend, Part 2. I excused myself to the bathroom, but instead, I went to the kitchen and found a sharp knife. It was easy enough to sneak up behind him and plunge into his back. He let out a pathetic gasp before crumbling to the floor. I felt nothing as I watched him bleed out. It was just another obstacle that I had to remove. Another person who didn't belong in my world. 18th of February, 2023. Steve stared at the contents of the box for what felt like hours. I need to leave, Steve said out loud, sweating profusely. He decided to take a drink out of the nearby fridge before he'd left to steady his nerves. The least Peter could have done was to offer refreshments after all that work had made him thirsty. Steve had enough of these practical jokes. Whoever this Peter guy was, he would be getting charged a premium rate for all these antics. As Steve finished the glass of juice, his vision began to get fuzzy. He dropped the glass to the floor, shattering on impact. That juice must have been expired, Steve sputtered to himself. Barely making the door frame, Steve emerged into the foyer to make his way out, but yet another box stood in his way. The Vanishing Act, Part 1. It was only a matter of time before someone realized that my wife and her sister were missing. My wife's other sister, the one I had spared, had grown suspicious and went to the police. I knew I had to act fast. I packed my bags and left town, but I knew that wasn't enough. The detectives would come looking for me, asking questions that I couldn't answer. So I came up with a plan. I knew I couldn't just disappear and hope for the best. I had to make it seem like I, too, was a victim. That I had vanished alongside my wife and her sister. It was a risky move, but I was confident it would work. 19th of February, 2023. The Vanishing Act, Part 2. I began by staging a break-in at our home. I smashed a window and ransacked the place. Make it all look like someone had broken in and taken us all. I left a few items of clothing behind, along with some other personal touches, to make it seem more convincing. Then, I disappeared. However, to ensure that no one gets too close to me, I started learning how to spike drinks with drugs. Although I do not condone this behavior, it makes me feel powerful. 19th of February, 2023. Profanity spilled from Steve's mouth as he flung the foul-smelling box to the floor. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was sick. This house was sick. This man, Peter, was sick. Sick and twisted. A human face, carved fresh, admittance to spiking drinks? Steve resolved to call the police as soon as he could run to the nearest payphone, to expose Peter of all his guilt. Except when he opened the door to the alleyway, he was greeted with yet another hallway. Vision still hazy, Steve stumbled his way through the hallway. He had hit a dead end. Puzzled, Steve doubled back the way he came, only to be enveloped in complete darkness. Suddenly, he remembered his phone. He brought his phone with him. Why hadn't he remembered it earlier? It must have been that damn juice, he mumbled, as he frantically toyed with the phone to get the flashlight on. Vision returning to the confused man, he started to punch in the number for 911. A phone began to ring out, except it wasn't his own. The ringing continued. Steve followed the sound of the ringing through the house, opening the doors along the way. Furniture flipped, upside down, crosses inverted, filling the rooms of the house he had just finished stocking. The boxes remained on the floor, but the furniture itself refused to obey gravity, falling through the rooms toward the baby's room. A door that wasn't there before called out to him. The ringing intensified incessantly through the wood of the door. The ringing intensified incessantly through the thick of his skull. Steve threshed the doorknob, flinging open the door and made a mad dash down the hallway. The source of the ringing was close. Through one more door, Steve would find it. Sitting precariously on a wooden table in the center of a room was a phone, ringing endlessly. Steve picked it up, demanding an explanation.
What do you want from me?
Steve shouted, unable to contain his bewilderment and frustration any longer.
Your job was to move the damn boxes, not to open them.
Steve's hands trembled at the sound of the phone call cutting out. His pupils shut around the room, like pinballs in an arcade cabinet. The door in front of him opened slowly. A man stood cloaked in shadow, wearing a clean business suit and a bright red tie, just barely out of sight. The last thing Steve saw was a glint of light reflecting off something the man pulled out of his pocket. Then, a sound pierced the air. A gunshot. Steve looked down to his chest, where a bright red stain began to emanate. A horrible pain gripped him as he looked up toward the man, then up to the ceiling. As his vision faded to red, consumed by pain, Steve closed his eyes for the last time. Peter was a narcissistic man that was consumed by the thought of being more powerful than his victims. More powerful than a dog, more powerful than his wife, more powerful than his sister-in-law and his best friend. He saw fit to keep mementos of his conquests. The ear of a dog, the rings of matrimony, the glasses of a concerned sister, and the evidence of betrayal. And finally, a face to hide his own. One wonders what memento he will take from Steve, a man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time.